I had a job once where somebody on high decided it would be a great idea where instead of hiring mechanics and programmers and then having a separate controls team, that they were just going to train everybody who came into the system to be a good controls person. Which on paper sounds good, but as we've discussed a little bit, that's tremendously difficult to actually pull off. But it didn't stop them from trying, and before long we had some of these students coming through the program and they did their schooling, and then they had some on the job training type stuff. And they each had modules for different systems they'd have to go through: mechanical, pneumatic, and hydraulic, and of course some of the controls and power systems related stuff, of which I was designated as the subject matter expert, or a SME as we call them, and they would come to me to get a sign off. And one of the first times they came to me, they had a module on programming, and so I was a good stop for that. And a couple of them came to me and they asked about, well, we'd like to have our sign off on the 5 programming languages. To which I looked at them and I kind of laughed and I said, oh, there's way more than 5 programming languages. And they sat there and said, well, our instructor tells us that there's 5. And I laughed and I said, I'm sorry, your instructor is wrong. And then they pulled up the internet and they said, well, look, the IEC, otherwise known as the International Electrotechnical Commission, say there's 5 languages. To which my colleague and I, who were standing there, turned and looked at each other and simultaneously thought, what the Hello and welcome to Chaos and Controls, the show where we talk about modern devices, technology, and techniques for automating your home, business, or life. I'm your host, the Automation Doctor. Today, I thought we might go ahead and drive home the point about who you really should be trusting on the internet, particularly when it comes to automation. Now, in all defense of the IEC, I think there might be a little bit that is lost in translation when they talk about the 5 languages in programming. And I think a more accurate way for American ears to hear would be the 5 methods of expressing a programming language. But without further ado, let's go ahead and talk about what is on that list. In no particular order, although I've loosely put these here in order of what I think is the functionally easiest to interpret and understand, going through what might be the most difficult. They have ladder diagram, sequential function chart, function block diagram, which I am going to stand right here and say that it is by far my least favorite on this list. We'll get into why. Instruction list, sometimes known as Robotic Operating System, or ROS, and structured text, which of course has all sorts of languages, including the Python that I have a tendency to scroll in the background of these videos. Now, in an effort to keep this video relatively brief, we're not going to go too far into any of these, but I will tell you that, in my opinion, the most important ones on this list to understand are ladder diagram, because it is by far the most important you will find in industry and in a lot of the tools that we can find on some of the sites that we'll be talking about, followed by structured text. Instruction list, which as I've hinted to is a type of robotic system, is really, in my opinion, a derivative of structured text, and honestly, if you can read structured text in 2 or 3 languages, chances are you'll look at a robotic operating system or any kind of an instruction list and it'll make sense. So in my mind, it's kind of a 2-for-1. Function block diagram is actually relatively popular in industry, and anyone that wants to get serious into industrial automation and controls, I definitely recommend understanding a little bit, particularly around companies like Allen Bradley's version of function block diagram. That said, on the home automation front, I don't see it being nearly as popular as some of the other selections. And lastly, we've got sequential function chart, which, although somewhat popular for beginner languages and just kind of your first foray into programming in a lot of cases, I don't necessarily see a whole lot right now that is, whether on the industry side or tools that we are likely to use on the home automation front, it's just not a common method of expression, and one that I feel, unless you really need a hand getting into programming in general, we can probably skip for the time being. But as always, if there's some interest around it, I'm more than happy to go talk about it. Just have to let me know. In the meantime, I think that's about all I have for now. We'll visit some of these in more detail at a later date. But until then, you all have a good one, and I will catch you next time.